Okay, Unity Radio, you're live. Welcome, everyone.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Pure Presence Book Club with your host, Bill Free, and our special guest, Rupert Spira. Hello, Rupert. Welcome.
Hi, Bill, and hi, everyone who's attending.
Yeah. Thank you all for coming. We have about 100, a little over 100 people that are viewing by video. And I'm not sure how the radio broadcast is working, honestly, because it seems to have somewhat of an echo going on over there. And I would just, if you're listening on Unity Radio and you're in the engineering studio, it might be a good idea to switch over to the video broadcast with the other link, because the video broadcast just seems to be cleaner in the transmission. So I just want to give that to the engineers over at Unity Radio, because this broadcast is going out live on Unity Radio around the world. We're very happy that we can be part of that, and it's my hope that we just get the wrinkles out of it so that everyone has a clear and a good audio transmission, and we can just continue with that. This is the first time we've done a video and a radio transmission. This will be the format that will be used on a weekly basis. If we have some wrinkles to get out of it, I'm sure we'll figure those out with the engineering department over at Unity. But this is what we're doing, and this is what it looks like. And I am so grateful and very pleased to have over 400 of you signed up for this book club on Rupert Spira's book. It's quite an amazing piece of material that Rupert has provided to the public, and I love what Deepak Chopra had to say about this book when he had an interview with Rupert. And he said, Rupert, so why did you write the book in the first place? And Rupert's answer is that he hopes it's a book that will speak to a certain extent to the scientific community, but also, and I feel mostly, now I hear a background. I think, Rupert, you might need to put a headset on, because I'm hearing feedback. This time, and I think that was the solution.
Okay, that's fine. I've got my headset on.
Okay, so the echo's gone.
Good. Okay.
Okay. And I love what Deepak Chopra said, that he feels, in fact, Deepak's words were, he says that Rupert is one of the greatest teachers of our time, a rare jewel among the teachers of non-duality. And Rupert is an extraordinary luminary amongst luminaries. And I just really want to say thank you, Rupert, for this material. This is a distillation of 40 years of experience of his teaching, the teaching that he has been drawn to, beginning with his mother when he had that little intuition at 6 years old, and then his father taught him how to present, and sort of modeled that presentation experience for him. But it's really the 40 years, and Rupert lists 7 major teachers in his book of his influence into the teaching that has brought him to where he is today, and that brings this book to us. And Rupert, I just want to say thank you for this material. I have just great comments, very inspired comments, and inspiration from people that are already reading the book, that have started it, and are looking forward to this 18-week study. We're going to do a chapter a week for 18 weeks. We're going to skip December, and then we're going to come back in January. Our last study group is going to be November 29th. All the study groups that are going to be live are going to be on Wednesdays. They'll be broadcast live at 12 p.m. Eastern time, just like this one is today. And then we'll go back and we'll just really marinate on the chapter for the week. This week is the introduction, and we're going to ask Rupert to just sort of introduce the content of the book. If you want to, Rupert, you can talk about it as an overview. If you want to, I love the forward and the afterward is like two amazing bookends that are describing the experience that two scientists are describing. Two spiritual scientists, in my mind, are describing the contents of this material in such profound language. I can barely wrap my mind around Bernard Crusopp?
Castrop. Bernardo Castrop.
Yeah,
yes.
Bernardo Castrop. He's like such a intellectual, mind-bending author, spiritual teacher, philosopher, all of those things. And then, of course, we all know and grew up with Deepak Chopra. What a profound forward that he gave to the introduction to this material. So I just wanted to properly, as best I could, introduce the contents or what my excitement, my inspiration for wanting to do this book study, Rupert, is because you speak to me. I learned about you a couple of years ago after I've been a Course in Miracles student and teacher for about 10 years, and I followed Mooji and I still love Mooji. I think he's a profound teacher of Advaita Vedanta, and I was drawn to you by looking at a video that Mooji did at a conference where you guys shared the stage, and I came across your presentation, and I went, "Oh my God, this guy is saying what I've been saying to my spiritual friends for years, that the most important thing for us to experience is awareness." And I didn't really understand what I was saying. But when I heard you say it, then I understood what I had been seeing and I had been noticing. I've been trying to express it, but I didn't have the words or the understanding to really bring it into someone else to understand it or to be able to articulate it. And you, my God, are the master of this understanding and the articulation. And I just want to say welcome to the show and thank you for providing this material to all of us.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you. And thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here with you all.
Thank you. So, Rupert, what I would like to start with is how do this material in your description with Deepak, you said that you were hoping that this material would land in the experience of taking something that seems to be complex and making it more understandable. I feel that you've done that, you've delivered that, and I would just like to sort of unpack the chapters a little bit, or maybe even an overview of what the book is, what it speaks to, what it speaks of. And before I do, I'm just going to give you, I have about 50 people who offered, like, what is it that you would like to know or attain or experience from the study of this book? And those comments, the replies to that question, what is it that you would like to know or experience from the study of this book, are profoundly inspirational, because they say that just a few of them. It says to dissolve, for understanding, for higher awareness, for non-separation, for direct knowledge of the self, for a group experience of the study, to experience true being, to experience myself, for Sangha, getting better at remembering what I am, awareness. It just goes on and on. It's just happiness, pure presence. Just a beautiful expression of the intention of this large group that's come to study together collectively your material. And
Yes.
I would like to hear from you, and I'd like for our listeners to hear, what is it that you feel is being offered here?
Well, hopefully, everything that you have just mentioned, the list that you just read out was a list of individuals giving what they would like to discover through this exploration, and all of their comments were relevant, and they were all different ways, really, of expressing the same thing, whether we call it understanding or happiness, or delving into the self, or exploring our true nature, or exploring the nature of experience, or sharing our being. All of these are legitimate phrases which point more or less to the same experience. So the book is really, it's a contemplative book, and it's also an explorative book. It explores experience. It doesn't just tell us how things are, but rather, in fact, I'm rather reluctant just to make bold assertions. It's more like we go on pathways, journeys together, exploring our experience. I think somewhere, probably in the introduction, I start off by pointing out a very basic fact, and namely that all our experience appears in the mind and is known by the mind. And therefore, our knowledge or experience of anything is only as good as our knowledge of the mind, or to put it another way, the mind's knowledge or experience of anything is only as good as its knowledge of itself. In other words, everything that we know and experience is filtered through the mind with which it is known or experienced. And just as one who looks at snow through orange tinted glasses will see orange colored snow, so if we look at reality through our human minds, as each of us does, our view of reality will appear in direct correspondence with the qualities and the limitations of our minds. And therefore, the highest science, the highest investigation that the mind can undertake must be the investigation of its own nature. So that is really the premise of the book. In other words, in order to know what anything is, the mind has to first know what it is. And therefore this question, what is the essential nature of the mind? Or because the common name for the mind, the common name that the mind gives itself is I. What is the essential nature of the mind is another way of asking, who or what am I essentially? So with that as an introduction, we then begin to explore what is meant by the term I. What are we essentially? And this question leads us to the recognition of our essential self as pure awareness or pure consciousness. And we then study having discovered I am pure consciousness. The book then goes on to discover the nature of consciousness or its qualities, if we can call them qualities. They are not, it's not technically quite right to say that consciousness have qualities. It is quality-less. It is without qualities, but we can say that it has qualities in the sense that it never changes. It cannot be disturbed. It has no age. It is ever present. And then the book then goes on, having discovered both the presence, the primacy, and the nature of consciousness. It then turns back outwards towards objective experience again, towards the world, and reconciles the relationship between awareness and its object, awareness and the world. So the first path, in fact, I think there are two chapters in the book. One is the inward-facing path, and the other is the outward-facing path. We start on this inward-facing path, away from the objects of experience, in order to discover the presence, the primacy, and the nature of awareness or consciousness. And then at some point we turn back outwards again on the outward-facing path or object-facing path, and we reconcile these two, awareness and its objects. So the book is very loosely structured in this way. I have to say it wasn't, I didn't sketch out a skeleton for the book and then write all the chapters as one probably should do. It was not nearly as calculated as that. It was a collection of essays. It was not written in chronological order, and then the essays were strung together and modified slightly to make it work, hopefully, as a coherent whole. So I hope that the book explores both these pathways, the inward-facing path, the Vedantic approach, and also the outward-facing path, the Tantric approach.
Mm-hmm. And how would you say that you did describe in your interview with Deepak Chopra that, and I also feel that this material does provide this, but how would you see that one has the material provides the platform as experience, to have an experiential approach to the content? How would one go about doing that? I was in a webinar with you last week and the week before, and one of the things that I heard you say to someone is to read the material. I don't remember exactly what it was talking about, but read it and then read it again until you understand it. I think that's what I heard you say. Correct me if I'm wrong. And as I'm reading this material, it's like a miracle appears, because I'll read a paragraph and I'll say, what does that mean? That's not getting in. And then I'll go have a cup of coffee, come back to it, read it again. All of a sudden it comes in. So, and it comes in my understanding. How does one make it an experiential experience?
Well, the book suggests there are several pathways that the book suggests. So, for instance, one, I don't remember exactly, but one such pathway would be something like, what is it that knows or is aware of our experience? all experience is, or perhaps it would start with an observation. All experience is known. Anybody listening to our conversation, for instance, is experiencing sounds, thoughts, feelings, perceptions. Now, each of those experiences, each sound, each thought, each feeling is known. We are aware of whatever we are experiencing. So instead of investigating what we are experiencing, we ask the question, but what is it that is experiencing it? So, for instance, the sound of my voice at the moment, what is it that knows or is aware of that sound? Or the sight of our faces on a screen, what is it that is perceiving that image? And in this way, these questions invite the mind, not in a philosophical sense, but in an experiential manner, to really explore what it is that is aware of our experience, which is another way of saying what we essentially are, because I is the name that each of us gives to that which knows or is aware of our experience. Each of us says, in common parlance, I know my thoughts. I perceive the world. I hear the sound. In other words, I is the common name for the knowing element in all experience. It is the common name for that which knows or is aware of our experience. So this question would take us on this very experiential exploration. We don't work out philosophically what it is that knows our experience. We ask ourselves, the mind asks itself the question, but how come my experience is known? With what do I know my experience? And the mind asks that question. And in order to find the answer, the mind has to embark on a journey. Now, if the mind asks itself, what is it that knows or is aware of my thoughts? The mind is not going to direct itself towards its thoughts. If the question had been, what is the content of my thoughts? Then we would direct our attention towards the content of our thoughts. But the question wasn't that. The question was, what is it that is aware of my thoughts? So the mind directs its attention away from the thoughts that we are aware of, and it travels, as it were. It goes towards that with which our thoughts are known. And this is a unique journey, unique in the sense that it is the only pathway the mind will ever take that does not require the directing of attention towards some kind of objective experience. It is an utterly unique pathway. And it is a single pathway. There are billions of objects, well, let's say millions of objects, to which or towards which each of us could direct our attention. But if our attention turns around in the other direction, away from the objects that we are aware of, towards that is aware of them, there is a single, it directs, it's a single direction, if we can call it a direction, in which the mind will travel in order to find that which knows our experience. So in this way, I'm just giving you an example, in this way, these questions or these pathways are very experiential. They are backed up with sound philosophical reasoning, I hope, but they are not primarily philosophical. They are, or rather they are truly philosophical in the sense that, of a philosophy that is rooted in experience, not in abstraction, which is, of course, the original philosophy, the true philosophy.
Yeah.
It's not academic speculation.
Right. Well, the thing that I really have come to recognize in the presentation of this material is that it brings me to experience my own investigation. It brings me to experience the self inquiry of noticing, and also, I've sort of I feel like you have coined that question. What is it that is aware of this experience? And I think it, of course, Ramana Maharshi uh, began with the question, "What am I?" And he investigated that and became well known for his introduction to that question. And for me, as I ask that question, I go immediately to uh, the, the space of no words, of just being
Yes,
aware of
exactly.
experience.
You're struggling, and quite rightly so, to describe where you go when you ask that question. And you're quite right to struggle, Bill, because wherever you go to find the answer to that question, what is it that is aware of my experience, is not itself any kind of objective experience, and therefore it cannot really be described in language. So when you try to describe where you go, you hesitate, you pause, you struggle, and indeed I struggle to find words. Of course, we use words in the end, but those words are only approximations, that with which our experience is known, and that in which our experience appears, indeed that out of which our experience is made, cannot be accurately labeled or named. So we do our best with language.
I love the practice, though, because when I before I met you, and I love to facilitate a guided meditation when I teach, when I bring. We are the In fact, this program is sponsored by teachersofgod.org, and we are teachers of A Course in Miracles that we're well known around the world. Mostly my wife, Lisa Natoli, as you know, you've met Lisa. You guys did a webinar together. We present the content of A Course in Miracles, which is it's a it's a it's the Western version of Advaita Vedanta, or that's what it's the one of the scribes described it as, the Western version of Advaita Vedanta. It's Christian in its language, and it's very heavy for ones that are interested in or following the indirect path of self inquiry or the direct path. It seems heavy for beings that just don't want to hear or the Christian language. But it's what pointed me to you, because you now are articulating an experience that I've been having ever since I found the course, and you're bringing me to the experience that I feel that the course points to, but I was having trouble actually finding the experience until I landed in your uh, in your world, and you revealed to me the experience of the self. You revealed it first. I saw glimpses of it when I went to be with Muji in Portugal at Sahaja. I saw and the self inquiry in that satsang experience. It begins to bring you into the opening of experience, because I feel that it's an indirect entry or an indirect portal into the experience of awareness. But you just lay it. I mean, that one question sort of lays it flat out. You can't escape from that question. What is it that is aware of experience? And the interesting thing is, whenever you start, especially if you're with new people that are not familiar with this concept or with this idea, and haven't bought into it or experienced it. The question, it just brings them into the experience that we all have when the question is when the answer is looked for, and to begin a meditation with that question, or even I think it'd be cool to begin reading each chapter, to begin reading when you sit down to look at this material, to locate and shift to the experience of the awareness of the presence of awareness, to begin experiencing it from there.
Yes. There's another question that I use quite often, which is even more direct and efficient than the question, what is it that knows or is aware of my experience? And that is simply, am I aware?
You have to have the answer. The answer comes forth.
If anybody asks themselves the question, am I aware? There is a pause, usually. And in that pause, we check out our experience. Am I aware or not? And after a brief pause, the answer comes, yes. So in that pause, we visited, as it were, the simple experience of being aware. If we hadn't become aware of the experience of being aware, we would have answered no to the question. But we all answer yes. And we answer yes because in that pause, we become aware of being aware. Now, what is it that is aware that we are aware? Obviously, whatever it is that is aware, that we are aware, is itself aware. In other words, when we become aware of being aware, that is awareness's knowledge of itself. In that moment, our essential nature, pure awareness, ceases to direct its attention towards objective experience. And as a result, the light of its attention, the light of its knowing, comes to rest in itself. As it were, it returns to itself. In fact, it never really left, but let's say it, having ventured away from itself, having turned seemingly away from itself towards objective experience, in this brief pause between the question and answer, it returns to itself. It tastes itself again. It recognizes itself. Yes, I am aware that I am aware. Right there is awareness's knowledge of itself. And it is precipitated by a single, simple question. Am I aware? That question takes awareness to itself. When I say takes awareness to itself, of course, I imply that awareness sometimes leaves itself, which of course it can't, it never does. But you understand, for a mind that seems to have lost itself in objective experience, there is an apparent return to its essential nature of pure awareness.
Yeah.
And then as awareness abides in itself, just rests, as the attention rests in the source or the heart of awareness, it is like a wave sinking progressively into the depths of the ocean. And as it does so, it is divested of its movement or its limitations. And at some point there is this revelation of the unlimited, unqualified nature of pure awareness, our essential being. And that is home. That whatever, if we, that home, that essence, that being, whatever we call it, it is ever present, it is imperturbable, it is ageless, it is genderless, it never changes, it is never disturbed or hurt by experience. That is the That is the place of peace. It is the source of happiness. It is that for which all people long, and it resides at the very heart of ourselves. But it is not buried or inaccessible or hard to find. It's not the privilege of a few people that have meditated for 30 or 40 years. It is available to all beings equally, and it is free. There are no preconditions.
The the thing I really like about the just to mention real quick, Rupert, it seems that there's a scratchy sound when you move. It may be that your headset's not all the way plugged in. I'm seeing a few comments on the chat board that there's a scratchiness, and it seems to happen when you move. So you'll have to sort of hold still or locate the problem.
I will keep as still as I can.
It only happens when you move.
I will try not to move.
But I mean, I don't. It's probably some, a little electronic thing. Not a big deal, but it happens when you're.
I'll keep still as I can.
Your mic may be rubbing against your shirt. There's a sound of fabric or something. Yeah, that's what it seems like. Right.
That's any better?
That actually did it.
Okay, that's it. It was
It may be his mic.
Cable against my shirt.
Yeah, it's there's just a few comments about it. Okay. I just want to say that, and I unfortunately technology requires everything to be perfect for people to have that crisp, audible experience, and I hope that we're providing that, and also video. But Rupert, I want to go back to the importance of this understanding, this question that brings you to the experience of awareness, because in my mind, and even before I met you, and I would do a short class, a short presentation, I would write awareness at the top of a whiteboard, and I'd say awareness is everything. Awareness is everything. And when you can find yourself in the experience of that, and this to me is where I think everyone is looking for the key to the shift from what might be local awareness, or what you call the finite, or the what is it, panpsychism? How do you say that word?
Panpsychism.
Panpsychism is what I think is local awareness, where you think you're a person, you think you're a body, and you're aware of what's happening as an objective reality. Is your experience is what you're aware of that. Would that be correct in sort of?
Let's leave panpsychism out of it for the time being, Bill, because that's something else. But yes, most people believe and feel that they are a finite consciousness, that their mind or consciousness, and in this context they are the same, that mind or consciousness is something that lives inside the body, in particular inside the brain, and is derived from the brain, and above all shares the limitations and the destiny of the brain or the body. In other words, most people believe and feel that the consciousness that we essentially are is born when the body is born, and shares the qualities or the limitations of that body. In other words, that it has a gender, it has an age, and that it is either healthy or sick, and that it one day dies. And this is the fundamental principle upon which our world culture is founded, the belief and the feeling that what I essentially am is limited to and dependent upon the body, and shares its limits and its destiny. And it is this single belief and feeling around which almost all our thoughts and feelings and our subsequent activities and relationships are based. And this belief it is the ultimate cause of suffering, because as a result of this belief, we feel that we are fragile, vulnerable, separate entities that either need to fulfill themselves through the acquisition of objects, substances, states of mind, relationships, etc. in the world, or need to defend themselves from the world. And these two activities of seeking fulfillment and protecting or fear, these two activities of seeking and fear define the apparently separate self or finite consciousness that most people believe and feel themselves to be. And it is the root of our sense of separation, and thus the root of our longing for happiness. And nobody would be attending your book club, or reading a book like The Nature of Consciousness, if that search for fulfillment in objects, substances, relationships, etc., had not, at least to a certain extent, failed. If the world had not failed to provide the peace and the happiness and the love that we all seek.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love the analogy in your book. I don't remember which chapter it is, but it talks about the moth and the flame. And it's funny that there's the way you describe that is so true, because it's like the mind that's in search of itself as identity is searching for the very thing that's going to remove it, or it's going to remove it from the equation. It's going to burn the mind of the seeker is what gets burnt up when it finds the
yes
flame.
Yes, that's true, but it's the limitations of the mind.
Yes.
Because the essence of the mind, which is pure consciousness, cannot be destroyed or burnt up. And what we call the mind, or the finite mind, is simply an imaginary series of limitations that have been added to pure consciousness. So when we talk about the death of the separate self, when we use the moth and the flame image, it's a nice image, it's a poetic image, but in this image, a real moth actually dies in the flame. And it's important all metaphors, of course, have their limitations. There is no such thing as a finite mind or a separate self. And therefore, although we can poetically talk about the separate self dying or disappearing, I, as you know, like to be accurate, or at least as accurate as possible. Yeah. To say that the ego or separate self dies is to credit it with too much existence in the first place. There is no such thing as a separate self, a finite mind, or an ego. The apparently separate self, finite mind, or ego is simply an imaginary limitation, self-assumed by consciousness for the purposes of manifestation. So what is referred to in the traditions as the death of the ego is not really the death of any entity, because no such entity ever existed. There is no thing, no self, no entity apart from infinite consciousness. What dies, or more accurately dissolves, are the limitations that seem to make infinite consciousness into a finite mind.
Yes.
And the analogy, I won't give the full analogy here because it's there's quite a lot about it in the book. But the analogy that I often use is an actor, John Smith, playing the part of King Lear.
Oh, yeah.
And John Smith loses himself in the part of King Lear and is, as a result, miserable. Now, King Lear then embarks on a journey to find his true nature, to find happiness, to find his peace again. And at some point, he realizes, I am John Smith. Of course, King Lear doesn't realize, I am John Smith. Only John Smith has the recognition, I am John Smith. Now, when John Smith realizes, I was never King Lear, I have always only been John Smith, can we say that at that moment King Lear dies? No. King Lear was never there in the first place. King Lear was just an imaginary limitation that John Smith himself assumed in order to play his part.
Right.
So we cannot really say that a character, an entity called King Lear, died or dissolved or ceased to exist, because no entity called King Lear ever existed independently in the first place. King Lear is just an imaginary limitation of the true and only entity, John Smith. Yes. Likewise, the finite mind, the separate self, or the ego, is simply an imaginary limitation, self-assumed by the only entity, which is not really an entity, but the only self, if we can call it a self, that truly is. That is infinite consciousness. So nothing real disappears when the apparent ego dissolves, just as no person really dies when John Smith recognizes, I am John Smith.
Yes, yes. Yes, that sounds...
That's an important, sorry to interrupt you, Bill. That's an important point to make, because in the traditional approaches, we often hear a great deal about the death of the ego, or getting rid of the ego, or disciplining the ego, or people spend a great deal of time battling with the ego, trying to destroy it or get rid of it. And in doing so, they perpetuate it. It's not possible to get rid of a non-existent entity. If I'm now going to thoroughly mix my metaphors. If you see a rope on the road and you think it is a snake, you cannot go to war with the snake. It's a waste of time trying to get rid of the snake, because there is no snake. The snake is simply a mistaken view of the rope. So what is it that, so to speak, gets rid of the snake? It is the clear seeing of the rope. Mm-hmm. And that is why in this approach, and this, I think, I may not make it explicit in the book, but it's implicit throughout the book. That is why we don't spend any time exploring the particular qualities of the ego and its suffering. I'm not suggesting that there isn't a place for exploring one's suffering in therapeutic situations, but in this approach, we don't spend any time getting rid of the snake. All we want to do is see the rope clearly, and that takes care of the snake.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. Well, we're going to take a break, radio identification break for Unity Online Radio. It's a 2-minute. Can you hear me, Rupert?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, good. So we have a few questions that are coming on the board. I'd just like to address some of the questions. There's one from Arlene that says, will this non-duality movement become known to the public in general, and is something universal going to happen?
Okay. Yes, I see it. Will this non-duality movement become known to the public in general? And is something universal going to happen? Non-duality it's not really a movement. It's not the latest thing, a new movement. Non-duality is or what is sometimes called non-duality, or Advaita, has been around for forever. It is the perennial philosophy, the universal understanding that underlies all the great religious and spiritual traditions. And it is given a particular form when it appears in any particular culture. It assumes the language, the form of that culture. But if we explore beyond the form or behind the form, we find the same universal, perennial, unchanging truth. Will it become known to the public in general? Yes, we live in possibly a unique era now, in that the internet is making this kind of understanding available in a way that it was never available before. In the past, to hear a conversation like this, or to come across the non-dual understanding or the direct path, one would have to have undergone lengthy, often arduous journeys, seeking a teacher in some remote place in Japan or China or India or Italy. Or so now at a couple of clicks on the internet, it's available. So in that sense, this non-dual understanding is perhaps already becoming known. In fact, I'm sure it's already becoming known to many, many more people than was previously the case. Is something universal going to happen? Well, something universal is already happening. Everything that happens is a convergence of the universe. Even a single thought in any of our minds it's not the product of it is a cosmic event, a local and temporal convergence of the entire universe. So something universal is already happening. But if you mean is something universal going to happen, is there going to be some extraordinary event in the world as a result of this understanding? I suspect not. This understanding will, I suspect, find its way, as it is already doing, into the minds and hearts of numerous people, and as it is with each of us now. And then each of us assimilate this understanding and express it and share it and communicate it to the best of our abilities. And in that way, it naturally communicates itself to those with whom we come in contact. Now, some of us may come in contact with large numbers of people, some of us only a relatively few, but that is irrelevant. That's not important, how many people we touch with this understanding.
Thank you. Thank you for that answer. You know, Deepak Chopra has this theory of almost like the 100 monkey theory of consciousness. Do you agree with that?
As you know, Bill, I tend not to speculate, and I don't have many theories that I can't substantiate in my experience.
Okay.
So that I mean, no disrespect to Deepak or anybody else that speculates about the extent to which this understanding is going to permeate our culture. I hope they are right.
Yeah.
But I don't know. And I would rather not speculate. I like to just simply speak about what I know for sure from experience. And that is why what I speak about is a little narrow. I tend not to go very far off that path. I'm just interested in what we can verify for absolute certain from our experience.
Yeah. Well, it keeps perception from running the show. For it keeps it that tight, narrow focus. I think is one of the gifts that bring you.
Yes. And as I say, sorry to interrupt, Bill, I don't mean to imply any criticism of those who are more speculative or consider the effect of this understanding in the world. It's perfectly valid speculation. It's just not my forte.
Yes, yes. Thank you. We have another question on the board from Ed Jones. Why does awareness need to experience itself in various forms?
It doesn't.
It doesn't need to.
No.
Right.
Why does why does a woman need to have a child? She doesn't.
Right.
She may desire to, she may want to, etc., etc. But it's not mandatory. There's no need. A woman is not incomplete. She doesn't need to have a child to be a complete person. It's the same. Awareness doesn't need anything. It is complete in itself. It is whole. It is perfect. It is indivisible. It lacks nothing. And experiencing itself in various forms doesn't add anything to it. So, nor does the disappearance of any form remove anything from it. To take the screen that each of us is looking at now. The screen in this example is a metaphor for awareness. The screen doesn't lose anything when an image appears on it. Sorry, the screen doesn't gain anything when an image appears on it. Nothing is added to the screen. It is just colored temporarily by the image. And when the image vanishes, nothing, the screen doesn't lose anything that is essential to it. The screen remains in the same condition prior to the appearance, during the appearance, and after the appearance. It is in the same whole, perfect, complete, indivisible condition throughout. So awareness doesn't need experience.
Thank you for that answer. I want to sort of add to that it seems like once I became familiar with the understanding of awareness, that experience and also the inward facing path, and the indirect path, the neti has allowed me to use the experiences to recognize in the beginning what I'm not before I subscribe to the other piece that you call the outward facing path, which is very helpful to include that in your experience of the whole of consciousness. But in disconnecting or releasing myself from what I thought I was, it's very helpful for me to use that practice of neti. I'm not this. I'm not that. I am this that is aware of this. But then that is before I brought myself, and I'm actually practicing that right now. I'm doing it because of you. I'm bringing myself back into recognizing that I'm what is aware of all of this is not separate from any of this.
But, and at the same time, is not identical to any of this.
Yes. Yes.
What is aware of our experience is not separate from experience, but nor is it identical to and therefore limited by any experience. So it is both intimate with all experience and at the same time independent of all experience, just as the screen that we are looking at now is totally intimate with the image that is appearing on it. In fact, so intimate that there is no distinction between the screen and the image. And yet, at the same time, the screen is completely independent of the image. When the image disappears, nothing happens to the screen. So it is this combination of immanence and transcendence
Yes.
at the same time, utterly intimate with all experience, completely free of all experience. That is awareness's relationship with experience every moment.
Yes. Yes. And thank you for the simplicity of the way you describe it right here. Also in your book, it makes it very clear. It makes it, I don't know what it is that I think you touch on it in your book. I know you do that when you practice looking at these ideas as an investigation, and it somehow it brings you into the experience that is available of the being, of the
Yes,
awareness itself.
yes, yes, because these ideas, they're not abstract intellectual concepts or ideas, that they are ideas that are derived from experience itself, and therefore have the power or the capacity within them to lead us directly to our experience. It's a term that Atmananda Krishna Menon called higher reasoning. And by higher reasoning, he meant very specifically a type of reasoning that comes directly from the recognition of our true nature. And therefore, it's a pathway, it's a line of reasoning or a pathway that comes from the recognition of our true nature. And therefore, you can travel that pathway back in the opposite direction to our true nature. And that is why this teaching is very much more than just a sharing of ideas. It's a much more intimate than that. Much more. It is taking us to the experience about which it speaks. It is not philosophizing about it. It is actually taking us on a journey, on an experiential journey. It takes us, as it were, by the hand and says, come on, let's walk on this path together and see what we notice along the way. And if we encounter obstacles on the way, let's pause. If there are objections, if the mind objects, let's just pause. We don't dismiss the mind. If the mind objects some way along a particular pathway, we pause there and say, okay, let's explore this. Is it true? What is my experience in this moment? So yes, it has a certain power within it, this approach, to actually reveal in us the experience to which it is referring.
Yeah, and that's how the description that it is when you had that dialogue with Deepak Chopra, you were hoping that this would be, or you were describing it as an experiential
Yes.
book content, and that's been my experience. I have to say that when I first started reading the book, I would sit on a page for days, and as I said earlier, I would leave and I would scratch my head over something that I read. I'd come back after a cup of coffee and I'd go, oh, that's what that means. Or all of a sudden it would take me there. The
Yes.
material would take me there because I guess, something opened up and made itself available. So we have another question on the board. It says, Rupert, from Michael King. He says, Rupert has said that the why question is the only question we cannot ask of God.
I'm not sure, and it doesn't actually matter, but I'm not sure whether Michael is sharing that comment because he likes it or and agrees with it, or because he challenges it. It doesn't matter, of course, but because I'll explain it anyway. Rupert has said the why question is the only question we cannot ask of God. So why do I say that? You see, when I say we in this context, I mean you and I, an apparently separate person or finite mind. When we do something, we do it for a reason. We do it to bring about some kind of result. In other words, there is a purpose to what we do. Now, we cannot speak of God having a purpose because from God's vantage point, there is nothing other than God. There is nothing other than God's inherently fulfilled, whole, perfect, complete, indivisible, self-aware, infinite being. So from that one's point of view, in fact, that one is not a point of view because there is nothing for that one to view other than itself.
Right.
There is no question of God having a purpose because from God way down, it's turtles all the way. There's nothing else. There's no question of trying to bring about something for a particular reason. The purpose makes sense. The why question only makes sense from the point of view of the finite mind. For the finite mind, there is a purpose.
Mm-hmm.
There is a meaning. Cause and effect works at the level of the finite mind. So it is completely legitimate for the finite mind to ask why. What is the purpose of my life? What is the meaning of life? Yeah. All those questions are absolutely valid questions for each of us as apparently separate people, separate minds, egos to ask. But God cannot and never asks that question because for God, there is no form, that there is only its own infinite being.
Let's go to the next question from Betsy LaRoque. It's about Mary and Jane, two of my favorite characters in Rupert's world. It says to Rupert, your explanation of how awareness cannot know the finite and therefore forgets itself. Mary dreams that she is Jane, raises a question for me. Once Jane wakes up to her true nature, is she not then the infinite knowing, the finite? This is possible after enlightenment. Why is it not possible from the outset when awareness first takes on form?
Yes, okay. So just for those of our listeners and viewers who are not familiar with the analogy that I often use, Mary and Jane, I'll just explain it very briefly here. Mary falls asleep. Mary lives in England. She goes to bed. She falls asleep in London and she has a dream. And in her dream, she dreams of Paris and she finds herself in Paris. Now, for ease of conversation, we call the dream person in Paris, from whose point of view the streets of Paris are perceived, we call her Jane. So Mary falls asleep in London. She dreams that she's Jane in Paris. So Mary dreams the entire city of Paris within her own mind, but she doesn't view Paris from the point of view of Mary asleep in London. She has to enter into her own dream, and she views it from the perspective of Jane on the streets of Paris. And this is an analogy for Mary represents infinite consciousness who, as it were, falls asleep or overlooks itself, forgets itself, and collapses into the finite mind. That's each of us. So each of us are Janes. innumerable, several billion Janes. Each of our minds are like dreams in the mind of a single infinite self-aware consciousness, or in religious language, God. So with that as a background, let's look at Betsy's question again. Your explanation of how awareness cannot know the finite. Okay, what do I mean by that? It's a little bit similar to the last question. The infinite can only know the infinite. God can only know God. There's no question of God knowing something other than itself, because from God's point of view, there is only itself. So the infinite can only know the infinite, and the finite can only be known by the finite. Mary, who represents infinite consciousness, cannot know the streets of Paris directly. Her mind has to collapse or limit itself. She has to become Jane on the streets of Paris in order to see those streets. So the infinite by itself can only know the infinite. In order to know manifestation, that is, in order to know the world, infinite consciousness has to forget itself or overlook itself and become each of our minds. It is only through the agency of each of our minds that the world can be known. So Betsy says, once Jane wakes up to her true nature, is she not then the infinite knowing the finite? Well, I think it's just a matter of language, but I'm going to mention it anyway. Betsy says, once Jane wakes up to her true nature. Of course, Jane doesn't wake up to her true nature. Mary wakes up to her true nature.
Yeah.
Mary wakes up the next morning and says, oh, I am, relatively speaking, I am infinite. My mind is infinite. Jane and the streets of Paris were just a dream. It is Mary that has the experience, I am Mary. It is John Smith that has the experience, I am John Smith. King Lear doesn't have the experience, I am John Smith. So that's the first thing. So when Mary wakes up to her true nature, is that not an example of the infinite knowing the finite? That is a reasonable question, Betsy. You could put it like that. In other words, what happens is that when Mary falls asleep and dreams that she's Jane on the streets of Paris, Mary starts lucid dreaming. She still dreams the streets of Paris within her own mind. She still views the streets of Paris through the agency of Jane, who is an apparently separate self located on the streets of Paris. But now she is lucid dreaming. In other words, Mary doesn't forget herself in order to dream the dream of Paris. She remembers who she is, and at the same time, she simultaneously assumes the form of Jane, through whose agency she knows the streets of Paris. So Betsy asks, is that not the infinite knowing the finite? Well, not exactly, because the infinite, Mary still, even though she's lucid dreaming now, she still has to know the streets of Paris through the agency of Jane's finite mind. Mary cannot directly know the streets of Paris. She still has to dream that she is Jane, although she now knows that she is dreaming. So, because you see, even before Mary realizes that she is lucid dreaming, in other words, when Mary has fallen asleep and forgotten herself, when Jane feels, I am Jane, I am a temporary, finite, limited consciousness located inside the body of Jane on the streets of Paris, from whose point of view the streets of Paris are known. Even when that is the case, the knowing with which Jane knows her experience still belongs to Mary. So the knowing with which each of our finite minds is knowing our current experience is only infinite consciousness. It belongs to the only consciousness there is, that is infinite consciousness. But it still comes through the agency of each of our finite minds. So even before we have woken up to our true nature, even then, even now, for each of us, the knowing with which each of us is knowing our current experience is itself infinite consciousness. So, and then when this self-recognition has taken place, when consciousness has, as it were, recognized itself, it still has to know finite experience through the agency of the finite mind. So Betsy then asks, if this is possible after enlightenment, why is it not possible from the outset when awareness first takes on form? So I think by that Betsy means, is it possible for awareness not to forget itself, to lucid dream right from the beginning? Well, the answer is yes, Betsy, it is possible. And we do hear stories, of course, they're only stories, of rare beings who are born, so to speak, fully realized, and they don't forget their true nature. But it is very unusual. So whilst it is theoretically possible, in almost all cases, consciousness contracts into each of our finite minds, and in doing so overlooks itself or forgets itself, and hence the feeling that each of us has, I am a separate self. And hence there is a pathway, a journey that each of our minds, each of us needs to make, this pathway back to our original nature, which is the search for enlightenment. It is in fact also the common search for happiness. Not everybody seeks enlightenment, but everybody seeks happiness. The search for enlightenment is in fact just a refined version of the common search for happiness. So the vast majority of people believe and feel they are temporary finite selves, and those people are by definition suffering. And as a result of our suffering, we seek relief from it, relief from suffering, which is the search for happiness. And as the search for happiness is refined, it turns into the search for enlightenment. So I hope, Betsy, that goes some way to answering your question.
Thank you, Rupert. We have a few more questions, and we have about a little bit of time left to a couple more questions. D. Lynn says, how do I rest the attention or mind so completely over what I am? Because when I ask the question, am I aware, it always hinges on the fact that I am aware only because I am alive at this particular body and mind.
Well, you say, D, I am only aware because I am alive as this particular body and mind called me. But how do you know? How do you know that? How do you know that the experience of being aware depends upon your body, in other words, your sensations, your perceptions, your thoughts, your feelings? You don't know that. You presume that. But that is just a presumption. We believe that the experience of being aware is dependent upon the presence of our body or our thoughts. But in fact, if we look for the evidence to substantiate that belief, there is nothing in our experience to validate it. The experience of being aware is independent of anything that we are aware of. You see, Dee, there is a deep presumption in your question. And it is the presumption or the assumption upon which our world culture is founded. And the assumption is awareness is dependent on the body. Awareness is a byproduct of the body. That is the assumption in your question. But if you go very deeply into that assumption, you won't find anything in your experience to substantiate it. But you have to be willing to question and deeply explore every belief you have and really see if there is anything in your experience to validate your beliefs.
Another question from Lori. How is this book set different than your previous similar book set with the CD combination?
Okay. Yes. Very simply, Laurie, the book CD combination that you refer to, the first one was called The Light of Pure Knowing, and it's a collection of 30 meditations. And the second collection, Transparent Body, Luminous World, I think 24 meditations. The first collection is a mixture of meditations on the half of them are the inward-facing path, the path of self-inquiry, and then there are some on the outward-facing path, what I call the yoga meditations. I won't go into those now. And the second series, Transparent Body, Luminous World, are all yoga meditations, the tantric path of sensation and perception. So the nature of consciousness is not a series of meditations. It's not a series of contemplative, explorative meditations. It is it's still very explorative, but it uses more reasoning and more explanations. Whereas in the two meditation book and CD combinations that you're referring to there's very little higher reasoning. They're just transcripts of meditations, just experiential explorations. Whereas the nature of consciousness, there are still very experiential, but there is much more reasoning in it. In the same way that, for instance, in this conversation that we've been having here, there have been a couple of very brief guided meditations early on. What is it that knows my experience, or am I aware? But we've been talking about experience, reasoning about experience. So this book, The Nature of Consciousness, is closer to the kind of conversations that we would have, question and answer conversations that we would have at one of my meetings or retreats, as opposed to the guided meditations. It's not a collection of guided meditations. It's more like a series of dialogues.
Well, and I have both sets of the CDs, and I find those meditations, I like to read them. I like to listen to some of them. I like to read them.
Yes. It's difficult to draw a clear distinction between them, because the dialogues that they sometimes go naturally into a meditation and vice versa. But
well, we're down to about 2 minutes left.
Okay.
At the end of our show.
What about Laurie's question? Should we take Laurie's question? Can you speak to Krishnamurti's dialogues on truth being a pathless land, is truth awareness, and on the importance of seeing the whole movement of mind? Okay, I'll be brief. We only have a minute or so. So, is truth awareness? Yes. By truth, he means awareness. Why does he call it a pathless land? Because, going back to our early conversation, Bill, this question, what is the essence of my mind, or what is the essential nature of myself? If the mind asks itself this question, the mind will be drawn away from the objects of experience towards its essence or source. In other words, that source is always in an objectless direction. There's no pathway to it. Any pathway would take us from where we are to somewhere or something else. There is a pathway from London to Edinburgh, or Paris to Milan, or New York to San Francisco. You go from one place to another. These are pathways, but a pathless path, in fact, the direct path is sometimes called the pathless path, because there is really no pathway from ourself to ourself. What is the distance between John Smith, the actor, and King Lear? There's no distance. King Lear is just a limitation of John Smith. How much distance does Jane have to travel in order to get back to Mary? There is no distance between Jane and Mary, because Jane is Mary, albeit with a limitation self-assumed. So this is why Krishnamurti referred to a pathless land, a land that the mind, it's not a pathway from object to object to object, which is the normal activity of the finite mind. It is the finite mind traces its way back to its essence in the opposite direction, in an objectless or pathless direction.
Well, I just want to say thank you, Rupert, for being on the show today. And thank you, everyone that has attended, both live today, this afternoon. We've had about 130 or 40 people online. We have about 122 right now, and we have about a dozen on the that are listening on their devices, and also Unity Online Radio. Thank you all for being here with us, and thank you, Rupert, for being our special guest and also the author of this awesome, magnificent masterpiece of material that you produced for us to really, I feel, to come closer to the investigation, the introspection of the identity of what we really are.
I saw, Bill, that several people on the chat asked what the name of the book is. It's called The Nature of Consciousness. And also, if I could just add, anyone that's interested in exploring these ideas further, I do webinars every Thursday evening, at least when I'm in the UK. You can find out about those on my website, and there's much more opportunity to ask questions and have conversation together if any of you'd like to follow this up.
Yeah, it's a great.
Thank you very much, Bill, for inviting me.
Thank you. It's a great gathering. I go to those webinars as often as I can. There's another one tomorrow. They're 2 hours. They're insightful. They will totally fill you with the understanding of the experience of that you're looking for. You're looking for that understanding, and to have the full experience of what these ideas offer. And like I said, I posted the link to the webinar. And what's the name of the website? So if people...
So it's just my name, rupertspira.com, and go on the non-duality.
Good. And you can find me at billfree.com, and you can find the Teachers of God at teachersofgod.org. And this is Unity Online Radio, and your host, Bill Free, at Bill Free's Pure Presence Book Club. Thank you guys for joining with us. And Rupert, thank you for being our guest.
Thank you very much, Bill. Thank you, everyone.
Namaste. Bye-bye.